Hey guys, here's another two cabinets I'd really like to squeeze in refinishing before the weather gets too cold. The reason I say too cold is that this lacquer should really be done at temperatures above 65 degrees. I do my spraying out on the back porch, which although it's enclosed, it's not heated. So by late October, certainly November, it's just going to be too cold and I'll have to wait probably till April or so to spray again out there. And these are two long dragged out projects. This one especially, it's a Philco 491040. If you go back through my videos, I think it's one of the very first videos I recorded last year was on this one. I got this from an antique shop and they had piled stuff on top of it and badly gouged it, and it was separating and there were chips missing. So I ended up removing all the veneer from it. My original plan for both of these was to re-veneer them like they did in the old days, which is with multiple strips. And you can see quite clearly on this cabinet that here's one strip and here's another with the seam running right down here. This top is also pretty badly damaged. This veneer seems especially thin, or maybe somebody tried to refinish and sanded it down, but there are plenty of areas where it's worn through right to the base wood. See it especially on the back here, so I'm just going to take this off and redo it. So my original plan, as I showed in the video, was to get some strips of mahogany veneer and I was going to glue it up the traditional way, which would involve cleaning up these edges. The raw veneer is quite ragged and there'd be a very large gap between these two pieces, for example. So you would need to clean up all these edges as well as best you can, and then use veneer tape to pull the edges really tight together. Use some type of veneer glue and clamping system and bond it down to the underlying base wood. I'd still like to try that someday, but I've only got veneer for one of these cabinets and I actually have a third one I need to do, so I needed to order more veneer. Well, I know another restorer online who did a similar mahogany reveneering job, and he used a place that sells it in large sheets. So I ended up ordering a 4x8 sheet from them of mahogany veneer, which is also paperback, which is nice. So I'm just going to go with this. It'll save me a heck of a lot of time. All I need to do is unroll this roll, cut out one nice big sheet, glue the whole thing down. The paper backing is especially nice because this raw veneer has a tendency to split when you're gluing it down, when you're handling it. This is very thin, brittle stuff and it can easily just start splitting apart. Whereas this paperback stuff, it adds a lot of strength to it. So for this guy, I need to remove off the old veneer. I'll try using an iron with some heat and steam and hopefully that will loosen the old glue. Otherwise I'll have to scrape it off like I had to do with this guy. And I'm going to do this one first because it's already further along. I'll get it out of this room, take off this side of course, and clean up this base wood and prepare it for gluing, and same with the back of this. I'm going to try a technique I've been practicing, which is to take Titebond 2 wood glue, apply a couple coats to both the back of this and the top of this, and let the glue actually dry for about a good 24 hours. Then put the veneer glue down, dried glue down on top of the other dried glue, and then use an iron which should reactivate the glue and allow me to, well, use it like contact cement. But the benefit is it's actually wood glue and has the strength of it versus contact cement, which I think works better for something like a Formica countertop. And then move on to the toning lacquers like I just did with that Tombstone radio. I've got brown mahogany for the top set, which I hope will be a really good match because that's sure what it looks like to me. And then I got some red mahogany / cherry for the bottom one. That one I'm a little less certain about. I haven't stripped all the finish off, so you can still see some of the old traces here. And it's a really dark, really opaque. So with the original set, you actually really couldn't see the wood grain at all. This is almost more like paint. I know Mohawk sells both toning lacquers, which are more translucent, which allow the grain to show through and just give kind of a stain look. But they also have pigmented toners, which are more opaque, and that might be more appropriate for this, but we'll see. I want to get the new veneer on first regardless, and I'll do some experimenting with different finishes. Before I do any more work on the top, I want to break down the rest of this cabinet and pull the chassis out and so on. Here's a brief overview of how this goes together. There's sort of a window frame over the front here. I've already stripped that down and removed the mounting screws. Then we have the safety glass that would protect you in case the picture tube ever imploded. It's a sheet of laminated glass here like they use in car windshields. I'll have to remove a couple screws here and here and get that out. I've already pulled the knobs off. Here's a look at the back side. Picture tube is actually mounted to the cabinet itself and the chassis is separate. This is how the early Philcos are, where they have 3 mounting brackets, 1, 2, and then the third on the bottom, and this large yoke and focusing coil on here. So I'll have to dismantle all of that, and then I'll pull the chassis out, which is really heavy. Used to be incredibly dirty, but I started working on this over a year ago just to clean the worst of it up. This set, I don't think it itself was in a fire, but it may have been in a building where there was a fire, because there was a lot of soot on it. But it was also covered in pine needles, so maybe a Christmas tree caught fire, I'm not sure, but most of that's gone now. It's also quite rusty. I got rid of most of the rust on here. Transformer, and then you can see the speaker's still quite rusty up there. So, take out the picture tube, the chassis, that speaker, everything that I can get. So I'm just down to the basic wood cabinet, and then I'll start tackling this top. While I've got the chassis out here, I thought I'd give you a quick overview. It's a bit different from any set I've worked on so far. This is my first Philco. TV, that is. I've worked on a bunch of Philco radios. I surmise that this is a bit different because they were large enough that they had their own team of engineers and they probably came up with their own ideas. One of which seems to have been to use a bunch of Lockdol tubes. Lockdols are tubes that have a metal base with a snap ring on them. Originally they were used in car radios so that they wouldn't vibrate loose out of their sockets. Well, they decided to use a bunch in the TVs too. Some of these coils remind me more of radio coils than TV coils. Oh, another interesting thing is that on each corner there's a rubber corner mount, which is what Philco used in a lot of their radios from the 30s to isolate the chassis from the cabinet vibrations from the speaker. This is so heavy though, this transformer is massive that these things are completely mashed down. I did order some reproduction ones, but I think they're just going to bottom out pretty quickly too. So we'll see how that goes. Another odd thing is the tuner. It only has about 8 positions. I guess when you got your set, the dealer would have already configured it for your city to either be the odd or the even channels, because they knew broadcasters weren't allowed to operate adjacent stations in the same town. So these actually pop out like so, and inside there's some coils and capacitors set up for certain stations. I'm missing one, unfortunately, but hopefully that's not one of the stations that I like channel 3 or channel 4 that I usually feed into my sets. Alright, like I said, I don't know when I'll get around to actually restoring this. First I want to work on the cabinet while the weather's nice, so let's get back to that. I've pretty much finished stripping down the cabinet. Here's the safety glass. I think you can see that it's composed of 2 sheets of glass, one about twice as thick as the other, with some type of membrane in between. I'll put this away while I'm working on the cabinet so it doesn't get broken. Same with the picture tube. Unfortunately, when I got this, all the conductive coating had flaked off, so I'm going to have to recoat it with Aerodag or slip plates. But that's not a big deal, I've done it before. Here's the speaker. Cone's in nice condition. just a little bit of rust. So here's the cabinet. I would have liked to have taken out this board with the cutout for the CRT, but it's glued in here pretty solid, so I don't think it's worth trying to bash out of there. I'll just cover it up while I'm refinishing the rest of the cabinet so it doesn't get any spray on it. These control decals are not in the greatest shape. I know there is one place that sells a set of kind of generic TV decals that have the gold lettering with the black outline. I'm going to check the dimensions in the font. I think they're a little bit bigger because they're meant for an RCA, but if they're fairly close I may go ahead and order those and then strip these off. Otherwise I think I will try to preserve this as best I can. It's tough to match colors though. This is kind of dinged up and I really would like to refinish it, but see how that goes as I get further along. The next thing I want to do is, this cabinet's kind of rickety, so I'm going to flip it over and check the legs and see maybe there's some wood screws that have come loose, or there's some glue blocks I can stiffen up to make this thing a little bit more stable. Well, here's the bottom. Nice vent holes, cutting this very thick chunk of plywood. There's 4 big mounting holes for the chassis. And it turns out that both legs on this side are a little bit loose. Also some veneer separation here. Doesn't look so bad that I think this had suffered a lot of water damage or anything, but there's definitely some type of cracking and separation going on in this sheet of plywood. So I'm going to do a little bit of clamping and gluing, see if I can pull this leg back in a little bit, tighten the screws down, get this a little bit more stable before I go back to working on the top. Well, that certainly helped. The cabinet's more stable now. So I'm going to move on to the top. The first thing I want to do before gluing on the new veneer is to clean up this top. There's some glue residue, there's some voids, there's some high spots. I want to get this nice and smooth so there aren't any humps or hollows or bubbles underneath the veneer when I glue it on. So I'm going to sand it down and I'm going to fill in any voids with wood filler and so on until it's as good as I can make it. To fill in the voids, I'm going to use this plastic wood product. I've used it before, and although it's quite nasty, it does set up quickly. Danger contains acetone and butyl acetone and isopropanol, vapor may ignite explosively using a well ventilated area, and so on and so forth. I got the pine, what they call neutral color, so it pretty much looks like bare wood. Need to mix it up a little bit and spread it on. Benefit of all those nasty solvents which are just kind of hitting me, it sets up quite fast, and just like it says, once it sets up, it is quite like real wood, and you can sand it and blends in quite nicely, and it doesn't shrink much, more importantly. That went on pretty easy. I used this scraping tool as a spatula and worked it into the voids. Spent about an hour and it's hardened up quite nicely, so I'm going to sand it with some 220 grit. And if there are still any voids, I'll do a second pass and I can move on to preparing the actual veneer.